for the book American Misfit in Search of Reality. Matthew is an associate professor of Romance languages at the University of San Francisco, is the author of the book One Word by Many Tongues, forgive me, I probably need a coffee rather than today, which explores issues of multiculturalism, identity, and spirituality. His intellectual interests focus on the relationship between different linguistic and cultural realities, and I'm excited to learn more about American Misfit today. With that, what I'm going to do is hand it over to you, Matthew, to tell us a little bit more about the book. I will put the link in the chat so people can follow along as well.
Okay, so good morning, California. Maybe good afternoon, the rest of the United States who might be joining us. It's my pleasure to sort of introduce my modest book. First of all, I wanted to thank my publisher, the Common Ground, the Research Networks, for publishing this book, because as you we'll see in a moment, maybe, or maybe those you already, some of you know, it's not a typical research book. It's based, it's a hybrid book. It's based on combining personal experience with some research, some inquiry. And at the end of what I have to present to you, I will ask you whether you value that kind of inquiry as a research. So let me start with the book. So let me show you first the cover of this book. If you haven't seen it yet, it was designed by the publisher. I really like it. And so writing that kind of book and to be considered a research book, I had to justify it. And I found the justification let me just fix something here so I can read it, with the scholar Paul Ricoeur. And I'm getting things that I don't want to see. Okay.
You might need to put it in the slideshow mode if you wanted to just see this.
I'm trying to just get, okay, I will have to hide the site. So we tried to read it. I cannot really see all of the. Oh yes, I got it. Sorry about that. The technology, I had help from AI, and AI is not always obedient to what the human will wants to achieve. So here is a quote from Paul Ricoeur, who claims that personal narrative actually is has a value of inquiry as any other way of doing research. A personal story represents a thread within the fabric of historical contingencies that make up a generalized view of history. Drafting and juxtaposing personal stories illustrate the impact of historical events on shaping one's individual consciousness and ultimately one's identity. So this is what I think, when you write a personal story, you kind of express somewhat about the place you live, the community in which you are part, and ultimately the country in some way. So this is my purpose. I think that to say something about myself, but not to be the center of this inquiry, but show something about the community, about the nation, about the world, about something universal also about the culture. So now, in my role as a writer, I envision hypothetical readers with whom I can share my experiences, anticipating that we will discover a similarity in our journeys towards affirming our identities. This endeavor of maintaining, of reconstructing identity is central to Ricoeur's exploration of how narratives play a vital role in shaping both personal and collective identities. He asserts that our identities are fluid rather than static, influenced by the stories we share about ourselves and those around us. Through the power of narrative, we establish a sense of continuity and coherence throughout our lives. So writing a narrative is also some sort of a personal journey that intends to bring coherence to our messy, very often messy lives. And this is somewhat, I would call it, following some religious thinkers and philosophers, a spiritual exercise in many ways. And I will read you something from the book when I make this more explicit. Of course, I didn't want to be the most important part of this book, and I had to have some recourse to the authorities, the thinkers, philosophers mostly, or literary critics, who give me some sort of warrant that actually my inquiry is not wrong, that they had similar thoughts. So I will explain to you how I proceed in writing, but this is the explanation why I have a recourse to authorities. By having recourse to external insights of thinkers such as Simon Weil, Leszek Kołakowski, Tsvetan Todorov, and Alain Finkielkraut, I seek ethical resolutions to my initial impulse of rejection toward the cultural alterity of my host country. Reading and discussing philosophical insights of these intellectuals has provided me with a sense of empathy toward the culture that has constructed itself on its own uprootedness. And the word uprootedness is very important here because this is the country of immigrants. Most of the people who came here were uprooted from their own culture. And Simone Weil, in her writing, says something very important, very critical about uprootedness. An uprooted person is angry. Uprooted person is destructive very often. And there is an element in American culture of that kind of uprootedness as destructiveness. And because, Native Americans lived here before, and now when you look at the country, most of the ethnic makeup of the country is different. It's not the country, the population that actually inhabited this land before. So that's somewhat my interplay, I would say, with the authorities I will quote later. So now let me show you the table of contents. So the book is designed, it's in 3 parts. So I'm using somewhat the biblical metaphor here. The grain, then would be uprootedness, and then there will be the graft. So the first part is the grain. And my first chapter is about my growing up in Poland, and I call it the grain of a spiky plant. Why am a spiky plant? Well, I am somewhat, I didn't find myself from my childhood in the right place. And so the spikes were sort of growing on me. And until today, people find me a little bit, abrasive in some way, to put it more objectively, in some ways less poetically. And the second chapter of this book is called High School Cradle of Fears. I hated my high school for many reasons. If you want to know more about it, you can just look into the book. This is the communist setup where you had to obey, you had to. When I look at the education now of the teenagers in America, I'm just appalled. I said, I had none of that. Maybe that's good, but nobody cuddled me in my high school, and I really didn't like it. So the second part is those uprootedness. I had a kind of pleasant moment in Poland when I started at college in Krakow. So I call it ephemeral blossom. But that blossom also told me, well, you have nothing to look for here. Get out. And when I decided to leave the Poland, I ended in Paris because the only thing I knew was French. My major was French in the college. So I left for that, and I called it voluntary uprootedness. And the biggest part is the graft. It's an attempt to reconcile the uprootedness to which I had chosen with new reality, which is not bad at all. My book, even though it's a misfit, it's not blaming America. It's about trying to figure out how to live in it with some sort of consolation, I would say. So my chapter 5 is the unbearable happiness of the exile. So it's an oxymoronic title saying that, I'm happy and I cannot bear it. And so I'm looking for the ways of coping with it. And now chapter 6 in New Poland, once I established myself in the West, in America, and after the collapse of the Iron Curtain in Poland, I was able to travel many times and to the new reality. And then I realized that I could not bring back my roots there anymore because the country was very different from the time I left. So I look for some sort of synthesis of all the experiences, and I find it in spirituality, which I will read for you about in the section that will follow. So, in the last chapter, I was concluding the manuscript, and the war in Ukraine broke up. So, and I think we see the evolution. I did not write anything about the current America yet because the manuscript was finished before the elections last year, but there is some visionary element in it, I would simply say. So let me go to now the prologue, which is some sort of an introduction of the whole idea, which I developed later. So you have here the quote from Alan Finkielkraut, Lost Humanity. Alan Finkielkraut is a literary critic. He is also a member of the French Academy. And he spent some time as a scholar at UC Berkeley in the French department. So there is a connection, and I certainly appreciate his writings. Although, if you read my comments and discussion with him, I do not always agree with what he says. Let me read this quote. A cybernaut abandons the obscene materiality of things for the endless delights of an insubstantial space. He was geographical and historical. Here he is angelic, withdrawn like the angels from the fatigue of life and, on earth and the order of incarnation, equipped like them with the gift of ubiquity and that of weightlessness. He is delivered from the past and from that presence in oneself of the dead that we call identity. So let me read now the section from the book that follows this quote. Echoing Alan Finkielkraut's words, this book has the modest ambition of taking readers on an introspective journey into the recent European past that preceded the proliferation of digital media. It attempts to draw on a canvas of events that still possess the sense of spatio-temporal distance. The conquest of that space required time and a kind of intellectual and physical effort that digital reality has nearly obliterated. That conquest implied above all a conquest of the self in a lengthy process of circumventing the otherness of the new territory. Today, cybernauts navigate digital space instantaneously, leaving aside the lengthy requirement of enculturation through mastery of language and familiarity with culture. Perhaps only refugees still need to learn how to fit into the host country's ways to establish a new permanent existence there. The book explores the fear that most of the humanity has become consumers of alterity with respect to tourism rather than eager partakers of what the other has to propose, which would certainly enrich those who show a degree of openness to it. The book dictates sequences of memories the author has recorded from his early life in Europe and from frequent returns to the continent after he established himself in the United States. It also offers insights about contemporary America from the standpoint of the European expat. In fact, this double distance from both Europe and America makes it possible for the author to offer the perspective of an outsider, not necessarily objective, but certainly detached from the national passions that blind the insider. The year of 2019 marked the 75th anniversary of D-Day and the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Iron Curtain. The horrors of the Nazi occupation of Europe and intellectual and economic oppression with the Eastern Bloc have become a distant memory about which the young generation learns from the textbook or documentaries. The book weaves a subjective narrative of life in the world arbitrarily divided by historical entanglement. So that's the beginning of where I explain the method, and I'm talking a bit about why I find it very important to talk about the past. Let me quote now from the chapter first, for chapter one. This is the quote from a philosopher, Leszek Kołakowski, who was exiled by the Polish Communist Party in the 60s and lost his job at the university. He's a specialist on Marxism. He was a specialist on Marxism, which he criticized. So this is the quote from an article of his. The vast majority lived in a sense of normalcy, only interrupted at times. People attended schools and universities, stood out for various positions in administration, got married and divorced, having no sense of alienation from the country where they lived, a non-sovereign country whose governments they did not choose, based on the already laughable ideology which nobody took seriously. So let me just read the passage here from my childhood. A summer day in a village near Krakow, the creek runs peacefully through the meadow, refreshed by newly grown grass after the first hay harvest intended as winter forage for the cattle. The mown grass dries in the sun to be compiled into haystacks, creating a unique Eastern European landscape, often reproduced by painters. It's already past St. John's Day, which is celebrated on June 24th, and therefore bathing is permitted in the creek, and it does not come with the risk of catching a rough Eastern European cold. Local boys gather by the creek and jump into its refreshing waters. There is no warning of the dramatic surprise that we, children of the village, are about to experience. Tadek suddenly screams, "Look, look, guys, a bomb over there at the bottom of the creek." The only girl among us, Ella, shouts, "Don't get any closer, don't get any closer, it might explode." We need to tell Mrs. Motykova so that she can call the fire station in the town. Mrs. Motykova, my mother, is a teacher at the local grammar school, known in the neighborhood as a kind of matron, gifted with unusually pronounced common sense. Her advice is often solicited by villagers in diverse emergency situations, be it illness, an accident, a need for some written documents, or a phone call. There are 3 phones in the village at school, in the presbytery and in the house, a sort of lifeline cleverly secured by my mother when the commune office relocated to a different place, allowing the teachers to move to the building. The former manor that used to belong to a family of nobles exiled by the pro-Soviet communist government in Poland. It is now a residence for the local public schools teacher, including my family. A couple of hours later, members of the volunteer fire department come and look at the misfired bomb. It appears to be just a shell, its content having been washed away by waters of the creek. This was in around 1965, only 20 years after the end of World War II. For us, children of about 10 years old, 20 years seem an eternity. Looking back from the perspective of half a century, 20 years appear to be surprisingly short time. Only in the autumn of my life have I realized that much of my early upbringing was influenced by the ravages of the terrible war from which the generation of my parents had never recovered. So that's the first chapter, beginning sets somewhat the mood of trying maybe to explain who I have become, why I am sort of this spiky plant. Let me go now. So this is Poland. Let me go to my next section, which is Paris, where I actually relocated, as I mentioned at the beginning. So I quote from Tsvetan Todorov. Tsvetan Todorov was very sought for the literary critics, particularly in the mood of surrealism, not surrealism, but structuralism. Sorry, and he wrote something about La Poétique, very well known book particularly in the 80s. And then he started talking about his own experience in his book, which is called The Man Out of His Homeland. For a long time, I woke up with a start. The details were different, but the broad outline of the dream was still the same. I was no longer in Paris, but in my hometown. My dreams never tired of inventing new variants to this impossibility of living again. But the end result was always the same. For reasons purely fortuitous, the return to Paris proved impossible. I have since learned that this dream was common to many immigrants, at least among those who came from Eastern Europe. So I will read the passage now, relatively short from the beginning of this chapter, voluntary uprootedness. I woke up in a flat in Paris Latin Quarter, frightened by the dream in which I had not been able to embark on the plane as the airport was too crowded. The plane had taken off. I had to present my passport to the border customs, and they had immediately confiscated it. I had been on the train back to southern Poland when, fortunately, the rising sun's rays had woken me up, the warming up the mattresses on which I slept on the floor. Thank God I am no longer in Poland, was my first thought when I opened my eyes. I had a place to stay for a month, having been offered hospitality by a young French couple whom I had met in Poland by chance while they were traveling in Eastern Europe. They had promised to offer a short stay if I ever managed to escape. They were committed anarchists, believing that the world was bound by political, economic, and sexual oppression. As I soon discovered, they rejected any social barriers in their way of being. The house was open to similar individuals who often visited and behaved as though they were in their own household. The host respected my rather uptight demeanor, attributing it to the oppressive impact of both the communist state and the church. They predicted a slow evolution under their influence. Their friends and acquaintances were interesting individuals despite their social and political convictions, which I had found shocking and now find simply misguided. One memorable encounter was with an American woman who declared herself to be a communist. I could hardly wrap up my head around this fact. Did I escape a communist country only to find myself in the midst of anarcho-communists on the other side of the Iron Curtain? Is that fate's irony to bring me into the core of the ideology my parents taught me to avoid and from which they suffered so much discrimination? The human element prevailed. The woman was nearly as genuine in her political convictions as Simone Weil. She practiced what she preached. She lived frugally, as I was to discover soon when she employed me to clean her apartment. She also had to solve her own ideological dilemmas. She told me she believed me that she should be her own janitor. She told me she should be her own janitor, but was too lazy to do it. But then seeing my predicament as a refugee looking for survival, she gave me a short-term job for which she paid generously and which helped me to save and add to my $200 I brought with me for the whole emigration adventure. And so that's the encounter with this American communist. And then let's see this. Just one word about America. I'm using to analyze my American experience by starting with a quote from Jean Baudrillard about America, which is a very interesting read if you want to look at it more closely. So let me just read this quote from him. Still, there is a violent contrast here in this country between the growing abstractness of a nuclear universe and the primarily visceral, unbound vitality springing not from rootedness, but from the lack of roots, a metabolic vitality in sex and bodies, as well as in work and in buying and selling. Deep down, the US, with its space, its technological refinement, its bluff conscience, even in those spaces which it opens up for simulation. It is the only remaining primitive society. Its primitivism has passed into the hyperbolic inhuman character of a universe that is beyond us, that outstrips its own moral, social, or ecological rationale. So let me just go to the quote to read. I eventually ended up at UC Berkeley, and from which I will read you about my experience now very quickly. Berkeley represented an artificial oasis in the great Western desert. It is the most fascinating product of American civilization. In its unique way, it combines scholarly rigor with intellectual frivolity. For me, my years at UC Berkeley represent an antidote to the negative psychological impact of the European academic system. And yet, the European heritage was always present in it. It was both an oasis where one could drink from the genuine sources of a solid academic tradition and Baudrillard's anti-arc, charged with human solitude and nonconformist to anything established by sociopolitical conventions. Todorov, who worked as a visiting professor in the United States, has lucidly analyzed the American university phenomenon. He writes, quote, in the United States, different in its form in this from the continental Europe, the university is, with a few exceptions, outside the city, both geographically and ideologically. We can never say enough about the effect of this isolation, this institution of campuses, our lay monasteries, has caused both in the city by cutting it off from the thinking element and among intellectuals by depriving them of the raw material of their thinking, unquote. According to Todorov, this wall between the intellectuals of the campus and the working masses in the city has resulted in a cultural bifurcation in which the two sides cannot find any common platform to fertilize each other intellectually. To the detriment of the university profession, those researchers working in the humanities have been able to freely indulge in focusing purely on methodology by adopting French deconstruction after uprooting it from its historical context and transplanting it into the gated campus disconnected from public life. Todorov pursued his charge by saying, quote, it is necessary, moreover, to be entirely cut off from public life and never to have left home as these academics do, to take French theories literally and believe that there is no difference between facts and interpretation, reason and beliefs, justice and interest, unquote. Such was the situation at Berkeley in the 90s. Yet the institution has had enough of long-standing tradition of excellence to not collapse readily under pressures of deconstruction. So I will now just jump to the end. This is my spiritual crisis here. So I'm starting with Dante here, midway along the journey of our life. I walk to find myself in a dark wood, for I have wandered off from the path, from the straight path. And so let me just conclude briefly here. A dark night of the soul descended on me with an unusual intensity during the final stage of drafting my dissertation. My experience of the demand of the job market and my personal nearly obsessive grip on values from a different world, my Catholicism preserved by the life-giving connection to the Hispanic community acted the way it had acted in the rebellious Poland. It pointed to the transcendent reality that made the quarrels of the day or the egocentric religious performances irrelevant. From the lectures of the professor from Paris, I learned about the impact of Jesuit schooling in the 17th century theater in France. I found out that Tasso and above all Corneille were intellectual products of Jesuit education. Suddenly, I realized the unexpected connection between these facts and the 3-year work experience in Paris in the 80s at the Jesuit school, Saint Louis de Gonzague. There was clearly something mysterious about this coincidence, whose discovery brought a sense of inner joy that overrode my gloom about the incapacity in adaptability to the progressive Berkeley. And now I conclude just my last paragraph of the book. This book is in fact a spiritual exercise in the Jesuit tradition. I have learned to practice once I integrated this religious order some 20 years ago. It invites one to review one's life periodically to try to recognize how the spirit might have operated in one's life. The French philosopher Pierre Hadot has applied the notion of spiritual exercise to philosophical discourse in general. He proposes the following definition. Quote, personally, I would define the spiritual exercise as a voluntary personal practice intended to operate a transformation of the individual, a transformation of oneself, unquote. The spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola are the heirs of antiquity transmitted by monks who had been first to use the term to denote spiritual practices. When Plato says in Phaedeo, according to Hadot, that to practice philosophy is to train in dying, he means to separate oneself from the body and from the viewpoint both sensuous and selfish that the body imposes. In writing this text, I have thought to look in the twilight of my existence for what has really mattered in my life. While putting the word misfit in the title, I did not intend to undermine the contribution of my American experience to my spiritual growth. The spiritual exercises has taught me, in fact, that my spiritual journey would not have been possible without the glimpses of genuine earthly happiness I have had in this utopia achieved called America, from which the Spirit has led me out toward the path of the utopia that will hopefully be achieved in a different realm. So I conclude here my readings, and I would invite everybody now to, sort of join me to possibly discuss if you have any
Yes.
questions,
Yes. Thank you, Matthew. We do actually have one question from Tim, who seems to be having some connections issues. So I'll read it out. It says, my question. Oh, how has your role as an educator informed and or complicated your perspective of the main issues in the book?
How my education my professional experience, how has it been? Well, it's certainly been, well, working at the American institution, all this experience made me somewhat, I would say, elastic, kind of. I had the 3 different contexts in which I have lived made me adaptable, I think. And the certain pressures that we have encountered at the universities now I have seen worse than that. So I take it, with a grain of salt, and all the battles of the university work, which we all, most of us are here university persons, uh, seem to be irrelevant in some ways. Although I understand at the same time, I think I've grown in empathy also, so I take them seriously, trying to put myself at the level of the persons with whom I work. And I think that's the great gift of that experience. And I do like very much American culture, although I cannot fit 100% into it. So I want to underline that this is not the blaming of, bashing American culture at all. This is taking the best from it and trying to share something from the other worlds. I know also. So I guess I would answer that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question or something they'd like to add? We've got Melinda, yeah, go ahead. Just I think you need to just unmute.
Unmuted. Okay.
Thank you for reading it, Matthew. That was really wonderful to listen to. I was thinking about students, maybe graduate students, but maybe undergraduate students as well, who could benefit from reading this because it's a look from the inside of a process of acculturation. And, the term is bandied around, but without much meaning, I think. And you attach your life story and events, social events that have occurred during that period, in such a way that it gives access to those of us who haven't experienced what you're describing. And as you said at the beginning, America is a land of immigrants. And sometimes those of us who were born here and who are monocultural, monolingual, don't realize as poignantly as you describe. So it's really a gift. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comment, Melinda. Thank you.
Wendy can't unmute, but she asked just to if you could clarify or say a little bit more about what you mean by the term American culture.
Well, American culture is well, there are several cultures. I think that's what you're trying to get from me. American culture is the cultures of everybody who has found himself or herself transplanted here in some ways, or born here without the clear connection. Either the connection of the people who just came here was interrupted brutally by the process of immigration, or those who were born here somewhat are in somewhat a very uprooted culture that tries to propose a model. I mean, I don't want to say something mean like Baudrillard says about American culture, that American culture is basically a big Disneyland, which is a digested way of approaching reality without getting into the core. And I'm also exploring that later in the book, what Simone Weil is trying to say about culture. There is an element, she calls it in French malheur, which is hard to translate, but there is some sort of, I wouldn't translate it suffering completely, but I think for the better term in English, I would say this malheur is a universal difficulty to adjust to any situation. And what American cultures tries to camouflage this malheur, but offering certain easy ways, technology, fast food, other ways of cultural being in culture. That's what I call the uprootedness, either because of the recent immigration, or uprootedness because the ancestors have been uprooted, and this culture perpetrates this uprootedness culturally. I don't know if you want to engage with that, what I said would be great.
We have another question in the chat from Roshan. Roshan, are you able to unmute to ask your question? Or perhaps it's easier if you articulate it than me. I'm not sure if it's possible.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you, Tamsin. Is that how I pronounce your name?
Tamsin, yeah, it's an
Tamsin,
unusual
thank
one.
you. Thank you, thank you. This was just wonderful. I really enjoyed it, Matthew, and I can relate a lot to what you're talking about. I'm very interested in the question of rootlessness. In many senses, many of us here are and live in that generationally, even if we think we're rooted in America, or white people in America feel that they are rooted here. There's also a rootedlessness for most people, apart from the indigenous cultures in this country. So I'm thinking about that question, and I was very interested in hearing more about what you have to say about that when you opened up your discussion about the danger and how dangerous that ontological sense of being is. So could you expand on that or talk specifically to that?
Sure, thank you. This is a great question because it leads me directly to my heroine, Simone Weil, who raises that question. She's almost obsessed with the question of uprootedness or lack of roots. For her, America is almost an exemplar of uprootedness because it basically replaced one population, uprooted one population, which she points to the Native Americans, and by a transplant from Europe, which has never really grown roots here. And she says the danger from being uprooted if you do not find a solution, which I'm trying to find through spirituality, if you don't find the solution for your own uprootedness, you will be destructive. The uprooted, she says something like, uprooted person uproots the others, destroys the others, basically. And I wonder if we don't have that ingredient in American culture of the push towards destruction because of the uprootedness. People are trying to find roots. They cannot find them anymore because the disconnect is too big. The several generations have lived through. And so there is a compensation by, I would say, hyperactivity, by technology, by, at the beginning, what I said in prologue following Finkelkraut, that there is now even technology made it worse because you don't have to grow any root, you don't have to learn language, you don't have to enculturate. You just basically click and you get the ready food to digest. I mean, the problem is digestion. You eat it and you might not be able to digest all that. And then it's frustration, illness, aggression, violence. So I don't know if you want to engage with what I just said.
Does anyone else have another question or want to add anything? Go ahead, Dolores. Oh, sorry, Dolores, I can't hear you. Is it just me?
Yeah, no, it's
I can see you're unmuted, but I still can't hear your voice, unfortunately.
Can you now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you both. I just wanted to see where greed comes in.
Grief?
Greed. Money.
Greed. Where does greed and money come in, Matthew?
When the greed comes, that's not my view of America. Having lived in 3 different contexts, I think America is actually the most generous country from all the contexts I lived in. Certainly much more generous than France, much more generous than communist Poland. So there's generosity is here, I think. I don't see any greed actually, but well, as you might be pointing to the most current situation and evolution of that's right. I have not experienced greed, personally. I thought when I got here, this was the most generous place I lived in because I came without money. I came without basically anything here, and got to the school, finished the doctorate. That would have not been possible in other parts of the world. It got to be said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Can I get back to you? I couldn't figure out how to unmute
yes.
myself. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
wasn't
I'm on
sure
my
whether
mobile phone, and it's just like,
that's technology.
everything is so small. So anyway, so thank you for responding to my question, Matthew. I find this so compelling. I can't even tell you how much I relate to everything that you're saying. So also for me coming here as an alien to, I'm going to use that language because that's what Vale would use herself, and many other people would. And I do find that Americans are probably the most generous I've ever come across also. So that is beautiful. And just going back to that question again, I find that awfully compelling that you're going back to spirituality. This is also a very people are very spiritual in this country, way more than Ireland for sure. Way more than most countries, I think, even most Catholic countries. So this is a very spiritual country, I think, population. And it's interesting that you're saying go back to spirituality to find that rootedness, that we need to get rooted in something. And I'm really compelled by it. So thank you for that. I will be buying your book. I'm very excited about it. I think that that question of Christianity is very interesting because it's so old that we can actually find our roots back in something. I don't know how you feel about this, Matthew. Just as you were speaking, I was thinking, oh, well, that is actually a way of finding your roots back to something that we all can understand. At least we all have a sense of. What are your thoughts about that?
Another great comment. Thank you. Talking about spirituality, I would say there is this sort of common saying that, I'm spiritual but not religious. You can often hear in this country, in the Western world. Well, spirituality without some sort of religious backup, then real religion. There's some religions that actually sponsor even that kind of spirituality that is egocentric. I think true spirituality got to be egoless. You have to forget about your ego, but unfortunately, there are tendencies in this country which correspond a bit to the cultural trend to valorize the ego. And when the ego is valorized or blown up, we cannot really talk about genuine, true spirituality. True spirituality, and the major religions have it, and they help people to somewhat embrace that kind of spirituality. They tell you when you are in the falsehood and when you are in a genuine encounter with the mystery here. I use the word mystery to whoever, whatever people's religious background is. But to enter in contact with mystery, you have to find humility and erase your own ego. And I think Christianity, for sure, that's my tradition, Catholicism. I certainly find it there. And whenever my ego gets blown up, I get slapped. I slap myself, saying, well, even, I was questioning my own approach to writing this book, whether it's not about ego too much. And I tried to lower the dose of my own ego in it. But it was a serious question, whether I should go for that kind. If it's got to be the solution in spirituality, it cannot glorify the ego here.
Gosh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you. We have another question from, is it Raquel? Raquel, are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Well, first, thank you, Matthew, for the wonderful presentation. And before the question, following up what you said, that I found very interesting in States, all the movement of the self-help books that are, like, for me, so egotistic, like just this autoayuda, how to be this, how to do that, all these books that are like manuals about how to find your ego that I have always find like very egotistic, as you have mentioned, that, maybe spirituality and ego. My question was like, if you think that there is something liberating on not having roots for some American people, like, oh, I don't know where I'm from. It's okay. Like maybe there is something liberating in the fact that some people don't. Why do they have to have roots?
Well, it's a very good question, Raquel, obviously, but I think these people, as I quoted Simone Weil again, uprooted people tend to uproot the other, and it's the game of force, basically, of domination. If the uprooted person will definitely, if they enjoy themselves in their uprootedness, I think they discredit the need to live in the community. We are, beings that meant to live in a community, and if you live outside the community, it becomes dangerous, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's I think it's comfortable, but it's a problem with selfish to being selfish, in the community when you do that, and that's not, I don't call it the genuine spirituality. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Matthew, probably have time to sneak one more in if we can in our time slot.
So maybe I will ask, the participants whether they find this kind of inquiry valid in some ways, or this is as a scholarly inquiry. What do you think, you who are in academia, maybe, or?
Does anyone want to jump in and answer, or give Matthew give it a go? Go
Melinda?
ahead, Melinda.
Thumbs up. Yes, it's of course extremely valid. I think it has a way of capturing readers by offering your personal stories. And the fact that it's rooted in these various scholarly works makes it all the more convincing, I think. Absolutely valid inquiry.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. Anyone else?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Does anyone else want to add anything? John, go ahead.
Just wanted to ask you about the unbearable happiness. Wasn't that
Sorry.
some kind of liberated uprootedness?
It was, but it also brought me back radically and violently to my roots, somewhat, to at least to an attempt to be grounded in what I have brought from Europe. Berkeley is a wonderful place, and I love it always, but it felt there was something in Central European upbringing of mine. There was a darkness which I could not discard from my personality. There was something I was longing for, and that's whenever this happiness relates to Raquel's question also, feeling uprooted in Berkeley somewhat spontaneously and without this baggage of history, I could not cope with it.
But it sounds like it was a necessary, if insufficient, phase in your life.
It was. When I look back at it, it was, because it taught me that actually, the sort of superficial happiness is impossible. So but it also revived me intellectually and even physically in many ways.
And you don't think there's a dialectic that you have to go back and forth between phases of liberated uprootedness in order to reconfirm your roots? Or do you get to some point where you're finally rooted and you don't have to go back and forth?
No, I do go back and forth. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to confess to you. I'm not, this is a sort of dialectic of uprootedness because I don't belong anywhere and I'm trying to belong still to.
Do you think one ever can?
Uh, I would hope that someone might be less obsessed with it than I am and make his or her life easier in that way.
Can you give an example of anyone who is?
No, I will have to go to the media. No, maybe you will provide. Are you?
No, I'm not at all. That's why I
Okay.
find this very interesting.
Okay. No,
Is it Zelia? Zelia, did you want to add something to the conversation?
Yeah, I'm Paul. I'm with Zelia now. Thank you so much for the lecture, Matthew. It's very interesting. And I think the question of like where do you come from, where does your identity belong is really interesting. There's this term called third culture kids, which is people who have moved around a lot and don't really have like a specific country or place that they, belong to. And me who's, I've lived in France, Norway, like California now, moved around a lot as a ch child. And I often get the question, especially as I'm traveling to other countries and the countries that I was raised in, Norway, like, do you feel more American, French, or Norwegian, or in France? I'll have you ask that question, or even here. And I really don't know like what the answer is, who am I, or what is my, sense of identity, because I'm kind of everywhere at the same time. So I think it's a really interesting topic to delve into. Like, yeah, where do you belong to as a person, or do you need to belong anywhere? Just wanted to comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I think you are very young, so you still have time to explore all the possibilities of, getting
Still Bill.
roots.
Or you could just be all of them.
Voila.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Anyway, with that, what I might do is just let you all know that I've put the link to the book in the chat. Please follow along, buy the book. If you're already a member of the Research Network, you should be able to download the PDF. Thank you to Matthew for his time today, and for a fantastic sort of snack of the book. It's almost like a little bit of an intro there, so it got us thinking. So thank you for that, and thank you all for your time. I hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank
Belonging.
you.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bravo.